The Lavender Odyssey by John W. Lavender. Chapter 6. McDonald Ancestors. The McDonald in Chesnut Cemetery rests between Middlesboro and Pineville in eastern Kentucky, about 15 miles from Cumberland Gap. In actual fact, the distance to the cemetery was more than that. I made up the 15 miles bit because of the popular song I used to sing as a teenager. Micah-el's natural mother and father were buried next to each other, even though they had left this world 40 years apart. Micah-el had never lived with her biological father, and her mother died giving birth to her. It wasn't until her father's death that she met her older sister. It was about a year later that we drove to a family reunion near Barbourville, Kentucky. The Chesnut family had organized a reunion of aunts, uncles, and cousins, all related to Micah-el on her father's side. Her biological mother's side of relations, the McDonalds, were conspicuously absent, and no one was forthcoming with any ancestry information. Until Ellie, Micah-el's elder sister, broke the silence. She had been in contact with an uncle and aunt. The next day, we drove to Pineville to meet them. We pulled into the driveway of a small 2-story house surrounded by walnut trees. We were met at the door by Sylvia, a tall, slim, handsome woman in her early 70s. She welcomed us as if she had known us her whole life. As we crowded into their tiny living room, Sylvia introduced Micah-el to Louis, who was sitting in an easy chair near the fireplace. The living room was occupied by a large oak table and a fieldstone fireplace. The fireplace had a hardwood mantel, which was adorned by framed photographs and an antique clock. Sylvia pulled out a cookie tin containing snapshots. While Sylvia and Micah-el were getting acquainted, Louis and I discussed the state of the union, which mainly involved Louis doing all the talking. Eventually, due to my lack of response, Louis picked up on the women's conversation. "There are the McDonald brothers," Sylvia said, pointing to 4 young men wearing fedoras. "They're in Barbourville's First Baptist Church." Louis said his great-grandfather had been the minister there, and he had been a lay preacher there for 40 years. Sylvia said that was where they first met. "I wouldn't get too carried away with tracing back your genealogy. You might not like what you find," Louis said. "He's talking about Jesse Brock's story about Chief Bengay," Sylvia said. "This is what I know about Jesse. How relevant it is you can judge for yourself." Louis went to the chest of drawers, ruffled around, and took out a crumpled paper. This is what it said. After the close of the war, Jesse Brock lived for a while in Guilford County, North Carolina, then moved to Franklin County, Virginia. Being dissatisfied with Franklin County, he moved back to Guilford. But Guilford didn't quite suit him, so he moved to Russell County in southwest Virginia, about 1794. This was the year the notorious half-breed Cherokee Chief Bengay and his band burned the Peter and Henry Livingstone's homes on Holston River, captured 2 Livingstone women, and set out northward across Russell County with them. White men pursued, overtook the party in the Big Stone Gap near present Appalachia, Virginia, slew Bengay, and rescued the women. This was the last known Indian raid in southwest Virginia. Being a newcomer to the area, the event made a deep impression on Jesse Brock. For, according to a descendant, James Brock of Leslie County, Kentucky, the old man told and retold the story. But Jesse Brock found disfavor with Russell County, Virginia, and cast about for another area. He had heard stories about Knox County, Kentucky, just north of Big Black Mountain. So about 1798, he took his small family to the banks of Wallens Creek, a branch of Cumberland River. Here, descendants say, he died on October 13, 1843. His wife is said to have been Rebecca Howard, a sister of Samuel Howard, the first settler of the area. Jesse was buried in the old Mason Cemetery on Wallens Creek, which became a part of Harlan County when it was formed in 1819. Towards the end of our visit, Sylvia confessed that she was supposed to have adopted Micah-el. This piece of news caught Micah-el by surprise. Tears rolled down her cheeks, along with the realization that her life might have been very different if Louis and Sylvia had raised her. She had always been grateful to her foster family for all the material advantage they had given her. However, Louis and Sylvia were good, simple people, not complicated like a family in Louisville. Micah-el asked Sylvia about the Blanton Cemetery up high, and Louis drew a rough map on the back of an envelope and gave it to me. You'll have to go back to Corbin and turn off at the highway just past the flea market, then follow the road to Little Big Richland. Look for a fork about 2 miles on. If you miss it, ask someone. Your cousin Page lives nearby. He'll help you. That's if he's not cruising around in that Dodge Ram of his. The road twisted and turned through hills and hollows, and as we drove, we talked about the first settlers. Micah-el couldn't imagine how they could have walked over the mountainous terrain, let alone drive wagons. As we drove past a smattering of run-down cabins, we noticed that the hollows were full of healthy crops, and almost every house had a new pickup outside. Finally, we arrived at the place marked on the map. The road was quite narrow and hard to maneuver through. There was a newly built house opposite where we parked. I thought it might belong to Micah-el's cousin and decided to investigate. As I walked closer, the house looked unoccupied. A teenager on an old bicycle suddenly appeared and screeched to a halt where I was standing. He wore a white t-shirt and gray-colored jeans. The bicycle had its racing bars turned upside down and gave the appearance of buffalo horns. I became acutely aware that our presence had been viewed suspiciously by the locals. There was an uneasy silence as we looked each other over. I asked him if there was a cemetery nearby. He didn't seem to understand. The boy had a squeaky Appalachian accent and repeated the word kin several times. Yes, I said, nodding my head up and down. This apparently was the wrong response. The boy gave me a squinty look and rode off down the road. Meanwhile, Micah-el had discovered the path to the cemetery, which was close to where we had parked. She pointed to a sign. Cemetery closed at sundown. We had at least a couple of hours, and so we began to walk up the gravel path. Trees lined both sides of the pathway, cutting through a forested path. Poison ivy grew profusely around every tree. The path was steep in places, and so we took our time. Finally, the terrain leveled off, and eventually we came to a wrought iron gate. The gate was locked, and we had to squeeze through a gap in the fence into a small area containing a few graves. The headstones were engraved with names of the dearly departed, but no Blanton, Chesnut, or McDonald there. As Micah-el inspected the smaller plots, I continued up the path and discovered an open area surrounded by oak trees. Here the names of the elect were carved in granite. I had an urge to shout, but reverence for the place prevented me. I quietly walked back to Micah-el. "I found some more headstones," I whispered. She hushed me, not wanting to be disturbed from her reverie. I made my way back up to the oak tree grotto, and Micah-el followed a few minutes later. The place had a kind of enchantment, and I could see that Micah-el was visibly moved. Large white butterflies sailed on the breeze as we contemplated resting there ourselves someday. The spot had a spectacular view of a green valley with golden hay sheaves glowing in the sun. We sat on the grass, absorbed in the peacefulness of the place. It somehow connected us with everything we had done together, including our home in Quebec, which was at the northern end of the same chain of mountains.